Let's start with a before lecture chant. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. This is what happens when I don't hear Kate's words in my head. Forget to do this part. So good morning, and today we continue our inquiry, or our closer look into empathy from chapter 2 of the book we're studying, Roshi Joan Halifax's book, Standing at the Edge. And she writes about empathy that as it's one of the 5 essential qualities, or mind and heart assets, she calls them, for living a compassionate and courageous life. Empathy is, as you know, our natural tendency to be able to feel into another being, to include and identify with the experiences of others. It's a bit like walking in their shoes. Although we know we can never really know or understand exactly what someone else is feeling or experiencing, nonetheless, we are capable of a shared experience that, at its very best, supports and connects us. And this interconnectedness that generates from empathy, as you know, is crucial to the well-being of our world. And just very quickly, I want to remind you again of the distinction that Roshi makes between empathy and compassion. Empathy, of course, can be a precursor to compassion, and it's included in compassion, but they're not the same, she writes. Compassion is feeling for another, with the aspiration to take action that benefits them. Empathy, on the other hand, does not always lead to beneficial action. And it's important that we understand there's a shift there, especially if we get lost in empathy, we go over the edge, because a good antidote to that is this tendency towards compassion that we already have. I think it's interesting, and I want to mention briefly a study that she includes in this chapter. And it's a study by Matthieu Ricard. I don't know if some of you know him. He's a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And it shows in powerful ways how these two qualities are different. He was, part of the experiment was Ricard was in an MRI machine, and he was asked to generate deep empathy while contemplating the suffering of others. And just the night before this experiment, he had watched a documentary about the orphanages in Romania. And what he took away from that was the suffering that these children had endured, not because their basic needs were not being met, but rather for a lack of basic human connection and caring. And based on their plight, Ricard was able to sink deeply into their suffering. And he really allowed himself to feel their pain, or how he experienced their pain as deeply as he possibly could. He generated great empathy towards these children. And understandably, over this period of time, by the end of it, he became overwhelmed, became exhausted, in his words. And we talked about this last week, this nature of empathic distress, going over the edge. Then in the experiment, he was asked to switch to compassion meditation, focusing again on these same children. But this time, he generated love and kindness and compassion and concern and altruism. And at the end of this part of the experiment, when asked how he was feeling, he said he felt a warm, positive state that included his desire to be of service to them. A very different experience for sure. And what the researchers discovered, interestingly, is that this difference was recorded in the brain. And the result is the brain registered empathy in that part of it, that part of the brain that's associated with pain. And it registered compassion in neurological areas associated, as this is a quote from Roshi, with positive emotion, maternal love, and feelings of affiliation. So although the images of suffering children were the same in both the empathy and the compassion parts of the experiment, his experience was totally different. His compassion meditation practice, our practice, completely changed the dynamic between him and the children. And our ability to do this too is very important. It's important that we cultivate our capacity and our willingness to shift from something that we can deeply self-identify with, which can become distress, to using tools that we already have to reground ourselves, to show up and bear witness to the experiences of others. Now, just as a reminder, empathy is a really good thing. It brings us closer to each other. And that's obviously very important. And also in this chapter, some good advice from Roshi in terms of a number of practices that support our development and maintenance of empathy. I mentioned last week the importance of paying attention to what is happening in our bodies. And I'm not sure how many of you attune to your bodies when you're on the cushion or even off the cushion. But if you do, and even if you don't, you can recognize that this can be a very valuable exercise for us. So it might look like you bringing some gentle awareness to where you can feel your body. If you're on your cushion, it might be where your feet rest on the zabuton next to the floor, or where your arms are touching your thighs, or how your neck feels holding up this great weight of your head. Or you can check in about any pain or discomfort you might have. And some of you might do a body scan. Practice during which you bring awareness starting at your feet, all the way up your body, up into your chest, and then out into your arms and fingers, and back up into your neck and your head, your face, and your scalp. And this is a really good way to reground ourselves, taking our attention away from our busy minds and into our bodies. And it also opens us up to awareness and what we are feeling and where in our bodies we are feeling it. Oops. The page now. It's me. Excuse me for a moment. I'm having a problem with mine. Let's see if it'll stay. Okay. I'm gonna prop it up with my knee. There we go. Taking our attention away from our busy minds and into our bodies, and it opens us up to awareness of what we're feeling and where in our bodies we feel it. It's powerful. And the point is, the more we practice this, the easier it becomes to access it. Whatever is happening in our bodies off the cushion, especially when we need to reground ourselves and support ourselves in relationship to others. So this is one of Roshi's suggestions, which we all know about. Another practice that helps build empathy is deep listening, a kind of listening with our whole hearts, minds, and bodies. And it just requires us to step away from our usual distractions, which are many, and to be willing to just reside in the present moment with a sense of not knowing and curiosity. And this practice asks us to let go of our preconceptions and our biases and our memories and our personal histories with others whom we might be with. And she suggests we choose, we can choose someone we know or someone we don't know, and include them in this awareness while remaining grounded. And as we hold this person in awareness, take note of what feelings arise within us, physical and emotional. And then the tricky part. Can we drop beneath our judgments and our own biases and experience a curiosity towards them that is not burdened by our own experiences? Perhaps it helps to incorporate the person's voice. And then you can be aware of how you are feeling in relation to that. But mostly just listen to their voice. And maybe we can notice what is going on inside of them. We might be able to sense into what they are feeling or thinking. What is happening in their hearts and their minds and their bodies. And then at some point, if it's within our practice, release them and just come back to our own experience. Whatever is happening to us, and we can just bring openness to that. In addition to body awareness and deep listening, she mentions two more. One is stewarding empathy, remembering the difference between self and other. And we are, of course, all interconnected, but we are also distinct from each other. So this is like walking on an edge. This is a balancing act. And she suggests that when we are at risk of falling over this edge, it's helpful to use words and expressions that remind us that we do indeed care about another person, but we are not them. She gives some examples that she received from Sharon Salzberg, whom I know most of you know. One of them is, may I offer my care and presence unconditionally, knowing that I may be met with gratitude, indifference, anger, or anguish. And another one, may I be peaceful and let go of expectations. And maybe you have your own expressions that support you at times when you're about to slip into a shadow side of empathy. And lastly, I think the fourth suggestion for cultivating empathy is from sociologist John Paul Lederach. And I don't know if you know him, but he is really worth a look on Google. And Lederach is Lederach. And this suggestion is called rehumanization, using our imagination to see another as a person first, to see ourselves in others, and to recognize our common humanity. This is something we might all think about a lot in these last years. He first speaks of grandchild imagination. So I think you can use your imagination right now to maybe guess what grandchild imagination is. He suggests that we project ourselves well out into the future, and make an effort to see that, in fact, our grandchildren and those of our enemies or people who make us uncomfortable, our grandchildren and their grandchildren might, in fact, have a common future. This is cultivating our ability and our willingness to imagine ourselves in a full, complete network that does, in fact, include our adversaries, include those that might bring us problems. And perhaps then we can see beyond our own conflicts and our own biases. Also, he speaks of not knowing, ambiguity, curiosity, and humility as being allies that help us to open up to these possibilities that maybe even right now we think are inconceivable. how could I ever talk to that person when I know how far apart we are on XYZ? So creating the inconceivable in your mind. Creative imagination, his third practice, supports our capacity to see a different future, no matter how improbable it might seem. And lastly, the imagination of risk. This is risk we talk about. We have talked about often. This risk of letting go of attachments and outcomes, and meeting uncertainty with greater strength and curiosity. So these 4 practices all together, body awareness, deep listening, stewarding empathy, and rehumanization, are tools in our chest, always available right alongside us, to be used when we most need them and see fit to access them. Frank Ostaseski used to say, you have all the tools, just leave the toolbox on the floor. Don't put it in between you and other people, but we have it to access when we need it. However, we also understand that our tendency toward and our access of empathy and compassion are always, always inherently available to each of us. Roshi includes in this chapter something, a koan that I really love, and just a brief mention of this. And some of you are familiar, no doubt. It's a dialogue between 2 ancestors, both Zen masters in their own right, Dao Wu and Yun Yan, and it centers on the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And as you remember, Avalokiteshvara has 1,000, who is the hearer of the cries of the world, has like 1,000 arms and hands representing skillful means, and in each hand, an eye in the palm, representing wisdom, so that she can free all beings from suffering. So the dialogue goes like this. Yun Yan, what does the Bodhisattva great compassion do with so many hands and eyes? Dao Wu, it's like someone reaching for a pillow at night. Yun Yan, I understand. Dao Wu, what do you understand? Yun Yan, all over the body, hands and eyes. Dao Wu, you only got 80%. Yun Yan, what about you? Dao Wu, throughout the body, hands and eyes. This image, like someone reaching for a pillow at night, is something I've always remembered. To extend compassion and empathy to others is quite simply this natural, this easy, and this instinctual. Something we needn't really think about to actualize. To me, it's just a beautiful example. And here at night, in the dark, where our eyes are not enough, our ears are not enough, and our very thinking is not enough. To reach for the pillow in the darkness requires quite simply nothing more than just letting go of our thinking about it specifically, and our need to figure it out. Even our need to know anything. And so it is with empathy, and of course compassion as well. Knowing and understanding suggests they're only 80% of the equation, according to Dao Wu. So our ability to successfully empathize with and include others, whether we know and understand them or not, is actually innate. It's vast and it's unlimited. And it doesn't require our thinking. Our capacity for empathy towards others needs nothing more than to let our natural tendencies prevail, like reaching for a pillow at night.